Hello, everyone, and welcome to the How Do I Knit That podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Dawn of Sarah Dawn's Designs. In this 8th episode of the How Do I Knit That podcast, we'll be talking about holiday knitting and the psychology of crafting. So, what is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast came about because I hear so many people saying, "Oh, I could never knit that. Well, I could never make that." And I think that's really sad. I'm a firm believer in the idea that anyone can knit or crochet or quilt or whatever your chosen art is. All it takes is some knowledge, the right tools, the right techniques, and the willingness to get a little ingenious. If you're looking for the previous podcast episodes, you can find them on my Patreon, which I will link to in the video description. With that said, let's jump right in. So, let's start with some psychology and observations around holiday knitting and handmade gifts. For those who aren't familiar, holiday knitting is the usually frantic knitting and crocheting people do in an attempt to create gifts for people. Often, you'll see small objects such as toys, dishcloths, ornaments, coffee cozies, and more marketed and placed as Christmas or holiday knitting. Now, before I go any further, let me debunk something here. It's not cheaper to make someone something. I often hear from fellow crafters, "Oh, but I already have the yarn, so it doesn't cost me anything." And sub yarn in that sentence for any craft supplies. And this is not true. I'll say it again. It's not true. I used to say this exact thing, believing that, though I was a poor university student, I had yarn and could make things for friends and family. But this is the wrong approach to take. Even assuming that you got the yarn and the needle or hook for absolutely free, there's still the matter of your time, which is in fact worth something. Even if you're not working or not in school, your time is still valuable. And that needs to be included in the equation, which I find many crafters don't do. Now, I'm not saying that making gifts for others is a bad thing to do. I'm not saying that using the yarn you have on hand to make something for someone else is a bad thing to do. But don't devalue your time in this equation, either. The other big thing about gift crafting, if you do want to make a handmade thing for someone, well, make something you think they will want. I've seen too many crafters make something based not on even a guess at the desires of the recipient, but based instead on what the crafter themselves wants to make. This sets up a situation for all sorts of awkwardness and hurt feelings when the receiver of the gift isn't enthusiastic about what was made for them, while the crafter is offended at the dismissal of time and effort involved. Having been on both ends of that myself, it's unpleasant. Sure, if you want to surprise your recipient, you don't necessarily have to ask them, but base what you're making on a reasonable assumption of their likes and dislikes. And that might mean buying yarn in a color you wouldn't usually work with, or maybe getting a new pattern or a new pair of needles. Remember that any gift, be it handmade or store-bought, should at least attempt to cater to a wish of the recipient. This means tailoring your gift to something the recipient has a chance of using and liking. Okay, with that out of the way, holiday knitting can be intensely stressful. People try and produce absurd amounts of socks, hats, mittens, and even larger objects like sweaters for friends and family, and often just end up crocheting at the last minute and resenting the projects. Not the best way to go about it. Now, if you're unlike me, one way to alleviate this and still get a good number of projects made is to start early in the year. These are the wonderful, super organized people, of which I am distinctly not. So, to anyone who starts their holiday crafting earlier, please share some tips in the comments to help us less organized folks out. But for the folks like me who aren't that organized and who are only starting to knit gifts for friends and family in December, there are still some options that will allow you to make your crafty gifts while still keeping your stress at least somewhat under control. 1. Don't make as many things. Pick the recipients of your handmade gifts with care. You want to gift it to someone who will not only appreciate the gift, but also the effort that went into the gift, as well as the knowledge of how to care for it. Not everyone needs, or even wants, a hand-knit hat, and that's okay. We are no longer in an era where if the woman of the house didn't knit it, it didn't exist. If someone doesn't get a handmade hat from you this year, they can go to the store and get one without too much effort, or even order one online. For all the faults the modern fashion industry does have, and there are many, one good thing it did do was make the necessity of creating clothing fall away. Sure, you may have folks who are upset because they didn't get a handmade thing this year, but pardon my harshness, that's not on you. And if there is a traditional obligation that you make something for people, consider revisiting that obligation. If the people involved care about you, They won't want to see you stressing yourself out trying to knit to a deadline. Hey, I just don't have the time to make hats for everyone this year, so only Grandma is getting a knit hat this year, or whatever variant suits your situation and need. 2. Though I mentioned above about making something your gift recipient will actually want, you also want something that you will, in fact, enjoy knitting or crocheting. Now, sure, there's something to be said for plowing through a project you don't like because your spouse/child/close friend picked a color you hate, but that should be an exception, not a rule. So yes, make something your gift recipient will enjoy, but also make something that you will at least somewhat enjoy making. The last thing you want to do is end up presenting a gift project. That can easily carry over into resentment to the recipient, and you don't want that. 2.5? With one addendum here. It's perfectly okay to use your gift to stretch your own crafting abilities and challenge yourself to do a technique you've never tried before, or a color you'd never usually work in. Just know the line between, I've never done this and I'm nervous, versus, I hate this and why did so and so have to ask for hot pink? 3. And this one's a hard one. Once you gift something, you have to be prepared to lose any control over it. Sure, it hurts if you find out that someone's thrown it out, regifted it, or ruined it, but it's their property now to do with as they wish. And it's a sign you made something they didn't value. And yes, it's perfectly acceptable to never make them a hand knit again. But they still have the right to do whatever they want with that gift. If you really want to reclaim it from the trash pile or garage sale pile, be absolutely sure to still ask their permission first. It's their thing now. But this also comes back to what I mentioned in point 2. Did you, in your gifting enthusiasm, make something they just can't use? Did you make wool hats for someone in Florida, or baby booties for someone who isn't pregnant and doesn't have kids? Or something in neon green for someone whose entire wardrobe is black? Then it is, in fact, far more likely to be regifted, or tossed, or garage saled. No matter how much your recipients might actually appreciate the effort, they just won't use it. This is why making sure that what you make at least somewhat matches what the recipient will use is an important step. And to clarify, this does not preclude jerks in the world. There are people who are, in fact, quite rudely oblivious about the value and work that goes into a handmade gift, and if your recipient turns out to be one of those people, well, sadly that can happen. And again, not crafting for them ever again is a very valid option. 4. I alluded to this when I mentioned the super organized people who start their holiday knitting in January. But even for the rest of us, giving ourselves a reasonable time frame to make the things is super important. I personally am very guilty of the, of course I can do X in time, when in reality, no, I just can't knit that fast. Even this year, I've left the gifts I'm knitting later than I really ought to have. So, know how long something really takes to make, not your overly idealized estimate of how long it takes to make. And don't forget the time involved in finishing, blocking, and all such other things. One of the best ways to help with that? Ravelry. Ravelry's queue function is a great way to match pattern, yarn, and, oh, deadlines. There's a field specifically for deadlines and finishing dates, and I use it happily for any deadline knitting. If you want to keep track of what you're making for who, I've yet to find a better platform. Another tip? Use a service like Toggle, where you can log the amount of time you put in a project. More than once I've found that I've actually seriously underestimated how long a thing would take, and having the data from Toggle, link in video description, has been super helpful in guiding me for the next time I make the thing. And don't worry, even though there is a paid version, the free version works just fine for most needs. Well, that wraps the discussion about mindset and psychology, along with a few references to tools. I hope the podcast has been helpful, and if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ask me. You can leave any questions in the comments, and I'll do my best to help you out. And, as I head into part 2 of the podcast, I do want to say, I really hope you're finding this podcast useful. I intend to talk about all sorts of knitting, crocheting, and crafting tricks, so that you can create amazing things in whatever situation you're in. Remember, you can, in fact, knit that. And when I say knit that, I mean crochet that or spin that. It applies to pretty much any craft I can think of. For the second part of the podcast, I'll often be relying on you, my listeners, viewers, and audience. I want to hear what keeps you from knitting or crocheting, and I'll try and address the barriers you mention. It can be anything at all. I'll at least try and give you some advice. If you are having trouble with a particular technique, are wondering how to knit with limited or no time, or can't find tools that work for you, please reach out and I'll try and address your concern on the podcast. I'll even do pattern support. provided the pattern is available for free at the source online, or one I can find at my local library. And of course, I'm able to answer questions about my own designs as well. I'll pull questions from the comments of this video and answer them on the podcast. Patrons can also submit an MP3 voice file or MP4 video file of their question over on Patreon, and I'll play that on the podcast. Well, now that I've addressed the mindset behind gift knitting and given some general organizational tips, what happens when you still want to make a gift? Let's talk about how to find and choose materials for gift knitting. 1. Small things. Instead of knitting sweaters or other large projects, look to bulky knit cowls and mittens, amigurumi, and other small objects that can be made in a day. Again, bear in mind the person who will be getting the gift, but there's still lots of small options. Got someone who loves tea? Make them a tea cozy. Got a coffee drinker? Make a cozy for the French press or a cover for the travel mug. Got someone who loves tech? Make an iPad or cell phone cover or a tablet stand. Even my father, who is wonderfully knitworthy, only has one hand-knit sweater, because a hand-knit sweater takes time. 2. I alluded to this before, but the thicker the yarn and the larger the needles or hook, the faster the project will go. So, you can make bulky cowls in a day. Oh, shameless plug, my snowdrop lace cowl can in fact be knit in a day because of the size of the yarn and needles. I'll put a link in the video description. Or even a big bulky shawl on big needles can go very quickly. 3. Yes, of course you want to choose colors and yarns that your gift recipient will enjoy, but that doesn't mean you can't shop your stash. There's nothing wrong with putting together a scrap fade scarf from your stash as a gift, as long as you know your recipient will actually wear said scarf. And definitely consider the yarn you're using for your gift. Most of my gift knitting has been hard-wearing wools, cottons, and acrylics. I can only think of 2 gifts I've ever made that were from silk blends. One was a lace stole that went to a fellow knitter, and the other was a hooded scarf that went to someone who, though a non-knitter, I knew would take me seriously when I said hand wash or dry clean this. There's no shame in gifting something in acrylic or superwash wool rather than cashmere or silk. And indeed, many gift recipients may not want or know how to hand wash their knit or crochet things anyway. I know at least one gift recipient who was so very grateful when I told them their hand knit could be put in the wash. It took the worry of, how will I wash this without ruining it, out of their mind. 4. Well, how do you find these patterns in yarn? Again, Ravelry to the rescue. On Ravelry, you can search by yardage, yarn weight, sizing, and more. So, start with a rough idea of what you want to make your recipient, and you can probably find the right pattern via Ravelry. The Ravelry search is usually one of the most powerful search engines I've used, and if the pattern you find isn't directly available on Ravelry, it should link you to where you can find or purchase it without too much trouble. As for yarn, Ravelry can store your stash so you can search what you already have. Still don't have the right yarn? KnitPicks and Eat Sleep Knit are both amazing places to begin your yarn shopping journey. Links are in the video description. Well, I feel like I've dropped a lot of information on you folks in this episode, so I think that just about wraps up the podcast. A huge thanks to my patrons